The small airfield buzzed with activity as mechanics worked on aircraft engines and pilots gathered around briefing tables. Among the group of seasoned aviators stood a young woman who barely reached 5 feet in height. Her name was Captain Marina Petrova, and at just 22 years old, she had already earned her wings in the Soviet Air Force during the darkest days of World War II. Marina watched as her fellow pilots discussed the latest intelligence reports about German aircraft movements. Near the Eastern Front, the men around her spoke in hushed tones about the increasing frequency of enemy raids and the desperate need for experienced pilots to defend their homeland. She listened carefully, taking mental notes of flight patterns and enemy tactics that would prove crucial in the battles ahead. When the squadron leader announced the next mission assignments, Marina stepped forward eagerly. The room fell silent as several of the male pilots exchanged glances. Colonel Volkov, a veteran with graying temples and countless combat hours, looked down at the petite pilot with barely concealed skepticism. "Petrova," he said slowly, "this mission requires flying at high altitude for extended periods. The aircraft will be heavily loaded with ammunition and fuel. Are you certain you can handle the physical demands?" Marina's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady and professional. "Sir, I have completed all required training exercises and logged over 300 flight hours. My size has never prevented me from completing any assigned mission." The other pilots murmured among themselves. Some had heard rumors about female pilots being trained in secret programs, but seeing one in person was still unusual. Many questioned whether someone so small could effectively operate the heavy controls of a fighter aircraft during intense combat situations. Despite her impressive credentials and demonstrated skill during training flights, Marina found herself assigned to reconnaissance missions and transport duties rather than direct combat roles. Each time she requested permission to join offensive operations, she received the same response about physical limitations and the importance of keeping experienced pilots safe for critical missions. Marina knew that words alone would never convince her superiors and fellow pilots of her capabilities. She understood that in the male-dominated world of military aviation, she would need to prove herself through actions rather than arguments. Her opportunity would come sooner than anyone expected. And when it did, she would be ready to show exactly what determination and skill could accomplish, regardless of physical stature. Marina spent countless hours studying aircraft manuals and combat tactics, while her fellow pilots relaxed between missions. She memorized every detail about enemy aircraft specifications, learning to identify different German fighter models by their silhouettes and engine sounds. Her small quarters became filled with charts showing altitude advantages, turn rates, and optimal attack angles for various combat scenarios. During her transport missions, Marina observed everything with the sharp eyes of a natural hunter. She noticed how enemy formations moved across the sky, where they were most vulnerable, and which tactics seemed most effective against different types of aircraft. These reconnaissance flights, though considered less important by her commanders, provided invaluable intelligence that she carefully documented in detailed reports. The other pilots gradually began to respect Marina's dedication and knowledge, even if they still doubted her combat abilities. Senior Lieutenant Alexei Kozlov, one of the squadron's most experienced pilots, started including her in informal strategy discussions. He recognized that her analytical mind and attention to detail could benefit the entire unit, regardless of whether she ever saw direct combat. "You understand aircraft better than pilots with twice your experience," Alexei told her one evening as they reviewed maps of recent enemy movements. "Your insights about German formation tactics helped us avoid 3 ambushes last week." Marina appreciated the recognition, but she knew that intellectual understanding was only part of what made an effective combat pilot. Physical skill, split-second decision-making, and the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure were equally important. She had trained extensively in all these areas, but without the opportunity to prove herself in actual combat, her capabilities remained theoretical. The war situation was becoming increasingly desperate as German forces pushed deeper into Soviet territory. Aircraft losses were mounting, and the need for every capable pilot was growing critical. Marina sensed that circumstances might soon force her commanders to reconsider their reluctance to deploy her in combat roles. She continued her rigorous personal training routine, practicing emergency maneuvers and combat techniques whenever possible. Marina knew that when her chance finally came, she would need to perform flawlessly. There would be no room for mistakes or second chances when the moment arrived to prove that courage and skill mattered more than physical size in aerial combat. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence across the airfield. Marina bolted upright in her bunk as the urgent wail echoed through the barracks. Outside, she could hear the sound of running feet and shouted orders as ground crews scrambled to prepare aircraft for immediate takeoff. A young communications officer burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. All available pilots to the briefing room immediately. Major enemy formation approaching from the northwest. Marina grabbed her flight gear and rushed to join the crowd of pilots gathering around the situation map. Colonel Volkov stood at the front, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious tension as he pointed to markers showing incoming aircraft positions. Intelligence. Reports indicate a massive German bombing formation heading directly for our supply depot and airfield, he announced grimly. We have perhaps 30 minutes before they reach their target. This is not a drill. Marina counted the available pilots and felt her heart sink. Several of their most experienced aviators were away on extended missions, and 2 others were grounded with mechanical problems with their aircraft. The remaining force seemed insufficient to counter such a large enemy formation effectively. As assignments were being distributed, Marina stepped forward. Sir, request permission to join the interceptor formation. Colonel Volkov paused, clearly torn between military necessity and his concerns about her combat readiness. The shortage of available pilots was obvious to everyone in the room, but sending an untested pilot into such a dangerous situation went against his better judgment. Petrova, this is not a training exercise, he said seriously. The enemy formation includes experienced bomber crews and fighter escorts. Combat conditions will be extremely challenging. Marina stood straight and looked directly into his eyes. Colonel, you have trained me for exactly this type of situation. My aircraft is ready and I know the mission parameters. The squadron needs every available pilot. The room fell silent as Colonel Volkov weighed his options. Outside, they could hear the sound of aircraft engines starting up as ground crews prepared fighters for takeoff. Time was running short and decisions had to be made quickly. After what seemed like an eternity, the colonel nodded slowly. Very well, Captain Petrova. You will fly wing position with Lieutenant Kozlov. Follow his lead, and do not attempt any independent maneuvers without direct orders. Marina felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. This was the moment she had been preparing for throughout her entire military career. As she hurried toward her aircraft, she knew that the next few hours would determine not only her future as a combat pilot, but possibly the safety of everyone on the airfield below. Marina's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she completed her pre-flight checklist. The familiar routine helped calm her nerves as she adjusted her seat and checked instrument readings. Her aircraft, a modified fighter painted in standard camouflage colors, responded perfectly to every control input during the engine warm-up sequence. Through her cockpit radio, she could hear the chatter of other pilots reporting their readiness status. The tension in their voices was unmistakable as everyone understood the gravity of the approaching battle. Marina forced herself to breathe steadily and focus on the technical aspects of flying rather than dwelling on the dangers ahead. All units, this is control, came the voice of the flight controller. Enemy formation confirmed at 25 kilometers and closing. Multiple bomber aircraft with fighter escort detected. Proceed to intercept coordinates as assigned. Marina's fighter lifted off smoothly from the runway, and she quickly formed up with Lieutenant Kozlov's aircraft. The early morning sky was clear with excellent visibility, which would work to both sides' advantage during the coming engagement. Below them, the landscape stretched out in a patchwork of fields and forests that would soon become a battlefield. As they climbed to intercept altitude, Marina reviewed her tactical training one final time. She knew that bomber formations relied on coordinated defensive fire to protect themselves, while fighter escorts tried to engage interceptors before they could reach the main target. Success would depend on timing, positioning, and the ability to exploit brief moments of vulnerability. There, Kozlov's voice crackled over the radio. 2 o'clock high. Count 12 bombers in tight formation with at least 6 fighters providing cover. Marina spotted the enemy aircraft as dark specks against the morning sky. They appeared to be flying in a standard defensive formation, with the bombers grouped together for mutual protection and fighters positioned to intercept any attacking aircraft. The size of the formation was intimidating. But Marina pushed aside her concerns and focused on the mission. The Soviet interceptors began their approach, spreading out to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Marina stayed close to Kozlov's aircraft, watching his movements carefully while keeping track of the enemy fighters that were beginning to break formation to engage them. Suddenly, the sky erupted into chaos as the first shots were fired. Anti-aircraft fire from the bombers created bursts of smoke and metal fragments that forced the attacking fighters to weave unpredictably through the defensive barrage. Marina found herself separated from her wingman as enemy fighters dove toward their formation with guns blazing. This was the moment when all her training would be put to the ultimate test. Marina gripped her controls firmly and prepared to prove that skill and determination could overcome any disadvantage in size or experience during aerial combat. Marina's aircraft shuddered as enemy fire passed dangerously close to her wings. A German fighter had locked onto her position and was attempting to line up for a killing shot. Instead of panicking, Marina recalled her extensive training in evasive maneuvers and began executing a series of sharp turns that used her aircraft's smaller size to maximum advantage. The pursuing German pilot seemed surprised by her aggressive defensive tactics. Most novice pilots would have tried to flee from such an encounter, but Marina instead turned toward her attacker, forcing him into a turning fight where her superior knowledge of her aircraft's capabilities gave her an unexpected edge. As the two fighters spiraled around each other in a deadly dance, Marina noticed something that her analytical mind had been trained to spot during countless hours of study. The German formation was beginning to spread out as individual fighters engaged different targets, leaving gaps in their defensive coverage of the bomber formation. "This is Petrova to all units," she called over her radio while continuing to evade enemy fire. "The fighters are breaking formation to engage us individually. There's an opening on the left side of the bomber group." Lieutenant Kozlov's voice responded immediately. "Confirmed, Petrova. Can you break free from that fighter?" Marina executed a sharp dive that caught her pursuer off guard, then pulled up into a climbing turn that brought her above and behind the German aircraft. Her months of studying enemy tactics paid off as she anticipated his next move and positioned herself for a clean shot. Her guns fired in short, controlled bursts that found their target. The German fighter began trailing smoke and fell away from the engagement, its pilot apparently deciding that retreat was preferable to continuing the fight against such an unexpectedly skilled opponent. With her immediate threat neutralized, Marina turned her attention to the bomber formation. The gap she had identified was still present, and several of the heavy aircraft were flying without close fighter protection. This was exactly the type of opportunity that her tactical studies had taught her to recognize and exploit. Marina dove toward the bomber formation with her aircraft's engine at full power. The defensive gunners on the bombers opened fire as she approached, but her small size and high speed made her a difficult target to track accurately. She weaved between the streams of defensive fire while closing rapidly on her chosen target. The bomber pilot seemed to realize the danger and began taking evasive action, but the heavy aircraft was too slow and cumbersome to avoid Marina's attack. She lined up her shot carefully, knowing that she would only have one opportunity to make it count before the defensive fire became too intense to survive. Marina's first target, a large bomber carrying incendiary bombs meant for the Soviet supply depot, erupted in flames as her precisely aimed gunfire found its fuel tanks. The explosion was so violent that nearby aircraft in the formation were forced to take evasive action, breaking up their coordinated defensive pattern even further. Instead of pulling away after her successful attack, Marina made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She remained within the enemy formation, using the confusion caused by the explosion to position herself for additional attacks. Her small aircraft darted between the larger bombers like a deadly mosquito, too fast and unpredictable for the defensive gunners to track effectively. The German pilots had never encountered such aggressive tactics from a single interceptor. Most attacking fighters would make one pass and then retreat to safety, but Marina was staying inside their formation and picking off targets one by one. Her extensive study of bomber formations had revealed a crucial weakness that larger, more conventional attacks could not exploit. Within minutes, 3 more enemy aircraft fell victim to her unorthodox approach. Each successful attack created additional chaos within the formation, as pilots tried to avoid both her gunfire and the falling debris from destroyed aircraft. The careful coordination that made bomber formation so effective was rapidly falling apart under her relentless assault. "Petrova, what is your status?" came Kozlov's voice over the radio, barely audible over the sound of combat. "Still engaging," Marina replied calmly while lining up another shot. "Count 4 bombers down, continuing attack." The remaining German fighters were desperately trying to locate and engage the small aircraft that was systematically destroying their bomber formation. However, Marina's size advantage allowed her to remain hidden among the larger aircraft while continuing her attacks. The defensive gunners were afraid to fire freely because they risked hitting their own bombers in the confusion. As her ammunition ran low, Marina realized she had an opportunity for one final, decisive strike. The formation leader, a massive bomber carrying the heaviest bomb load, was attempting to maintain course toward the target despite the chaos around it. Destroying this aircraft would not only remove a significant threat but also likely cause the remaining bombers to abort their mission entirely. Marina positioned herself for what would be her most dangerous attack yet. The formation leader was surrounded by defensive fire from multiple aircraft, and approaching it would require flying through a concentrated barrage of anti-aircraft rounds. However, she had come too far to hesitate now. With her fuel running low and ammunition nearly exhausted, Marina committed to one final attack run. She dove toward the formation leader with her guns blazing, determined to complete a mission that had already exceeded everyone's expectations. The defensive fire intensified as every remaining gunner focused on stopping her approach, filling the sky with deadly metal fragments and tracer rounds. Marina's final attack run succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Her remaining ammunition found critical systems on the formation leader, causing a catastrophic explosion that not only destroyed the target bomber but also damaged 2 adjacent aircraft severely enough to force them out of formation. The shock wave from the explosion rattled her own aircraft, but she managed to maintain control as she finally broke away from the enemy formation. The surviving German bombers, having lost more than half their number to a single small fighter, abandoned their mission and turned back toward their base. The fighter escorts, low on fuel and demoralized by their inability to protect the bombers, provided cover for the retreat rather than continuing to engage the Soviet interceptors. As Marina flew back toward her airfield, she could hardly believe what had just happened. In less than 30 minutes of combat, she had single-handedly destroyed 8 enemy bombers and forced the remaining aircraft to abort their mission. The supply depot and airfield that had been in immediate danger were now safe. Her radio crackled with messages from other pilots who had witnessed her incredible performance. Lieutenant Kozlov's voice was filled with amazement as he reported the results to ground control. "This is Kozlov to base. Mission successful. Captain Petrova has destroyed 8 enemy bombers. Repeat, 8 confirmed kills by a single pilot." When Marina landed, she found the entire airfield gathered to witness her return. Colonel Volkov stood at the front of the crowd, his expression a mixture of astonishment and pride. The same man who had questioned her ability to handle combat missions just hours earlier now watched as she climbed out of her bullet-scarred aircraft. "Captain Petrova," he said formally as she approached, "your actions today have saved this installation and demonstrated extraordinary skill under combat conditions. I owe you an apology for doubting your capabilities." Marina stood at attention and replied simply, "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." The news of her remarkable achievement spread quickly throughout the Soviet Air Force. Her tactical innovation of staying within enemy formations rather than making traditional hit-and-run attacks became a studied technique that other pilots adapted for their own missions. Military historians would later describe her approach as a perfect example of how individual skill and creative thinking could overcome seemingly impossible odds. More importantly for Marina, she had finally proven that physical size meant nothing compared to courage, intelligence, and determination in aerial combat. From that day forward, no one questioned her assignment to the most critical and dangerous missions. She had earned her place among the elite combat pilots through actions that spoke louder than any words ever could. Her victory became a symbol of hope during the darkest days of the war, showing that even against overwhelming odds, a single determined individual could make a decisive difference in the outcome of battle.